In addition to dealing with an influx of migrants, Customs and Border agents are also working to combat the transport of narcotics into the U.S. This week, officers in Brownsville, Texas, seized meth and cocaine valued at roughly $272,000.
In his book, Unwavering, A Border Agent's Journey from Hunter to Hunted, former special agent and supervisor with the Department of Homeland Security, Jason Piccolo, gives a first-hand account of what the southwest border is really like and argues that crisis at the border is not new, but can be solved one piece of legislation at a time. He joins us now in studio to share his experiences and what he thinks Washington should be focused on. Congratulations on the book. Nice to have you, Jason.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Tell us what about the debate we have here in Washington frustrates you?
Everything.
Had a feeling you might say that.
Yeah, nothing can happen if it has a T and P at the end of it. So if you want to say, hey, we need to put up a wall, well, it's not going to happen. But we actually do need walls. We need immigration reform. We need the whole gambit. We need to hire agents. We need to do a bunch. But without actually sitting down at the table with the people that actually work the border, nothing's going to happen.
Everyone that I talked to about the border lately, and I was just down in El Paso last week, says that the situation is in many ways the worst that it has been from the perspective of an orderly immigration system that can handle the inflow and the migrants. What would you do? I mean, what would you want to tell the president if he sat down with you in terms of ways that this could be fixed from all the different perspectives about what's going on?
You know, it's like a threefold thing. You need to actually work in the optics down south that there is no immigration benefit if you make it across the border. That's one thing that can't happen right now. Right now, the migrants think if they can get across that border, they will get a foothold here and they'll get some sort of benefit. And they're right. They're absolutely right. That is one thing you need to, but in order to do that, you need to change the benefits that are happening up here, which is we're not going to pass any immigration reform anytime in the near future. So
do you think the country's lost the stomach for interior enforcement of illegal aliens being deported out of the country, short of committing a serious felony?
Heinous crime,
do you think, yeah, short of a heinous crime, do you think the country no longer really has the stomach for deporting people?
Absolutely. Now, let's backtrack to the 90s when immigration really was starting to go crazy. And we'll take San Diego for instance. There was no wall there. There was no fence. And you'd have hundreds and hundreds of migrants running up the highways in the middle of the day, at night, all the time. But what Clinton did was he erected a 14-mile fence from the Pacific Ocean to the Otay Mountains, and it curbed the flow of traffic to the east. Now, what that also brought was economic prosperity in the suburbs of San Diego and the town of Chula Vista. Chula Vista then was able to erect thousands and thousands of houses, new schools, new everything, because there was no more foot traffic coming across. But right now, without any type of infrastructure as far as a wall, a fence, or anything, the traffic is going to flow right through any urban development or anything.
I mean, what we're talking about today is fundamentally different from what was happening in the 90s in that it's mostly family units. It's not, you know, that was single men seeking mostly economic opportunity.
Yes.
Now you're talking about families who are fleeing from the Northern Triangle countries. The president has recently suggested cutting aid to those countries, which to me seems incredibly counterproductive. You talk about, you know, the pull factor, right, what people can receive when they come here. Don't we also need to look at how we can help to make their own countries livable so they want to stay?
Yes, exactly. I don't have any issue with that at all. And that's part of what needs to be done. It's a multifold process. You're going to need not only to help the countries out down south, but you're also going to need these special agents to disrupt and dismantle the narco smuggling and human trafficking organizations. You can't just do it with reactive enforcement at the border. You need actual special agents that are going to actually go after where it hurts these organizations in their pocketbook, their money. And that's the only way you're going to stop the flow of smuggling. But yes, you need to stop that.
How are we doing in the fight against the cartels and the importation of drugs in this country? Because people look around at the opioid epidemic, which is obviously partially a function of what would be prescription drugs, although that has dropped off dramatically, and now it is mostly illicit, entirely illicit drugs, not on the secondary market prescription drugs. It's illegal drugs that tend to come from Mexico. In fact, some of them are coming via China to Mexico in industrial labs that the cartels have set up. So how are we doing in this fight? Because if you just look at the casualty numbers, it looks like the cartels are taking out more people in a sense than they ever have before.
Yes.
And in Mexico, they certainly are. The highest murder rate in the country's history was last year.
Exactly. I always look at the supply and demand. Every little town in this country, in our country, has someone who has a cocaine problem. Let's say they use an ounce of cocaine a week, or not a week, but let's say one person, an ounce of cocaine. How much narcotics have to come across our border to supply every little town in our country? And how much are we actually getting? Once in a while, you'll see on the news that Coast Guard popped 2 tons of, a 2-ton load of a vessel. That's nothing compared to what is coming across the border to actually supply everybody that demands the narcotics. So we're not even making a dent in it right now.
And that's the thing. I mean, we've been interdicting heroin for over 100 years, and yet here we are with the worst addiction crisis in our nation's history. I mean, don't we have to say that this approach that we're taking fundamentally has failed?
Well, think about the war on drugs started in the 1980s, and we're still fighting that same war on drugs. So we need, and that's where I'm a big proponent of addiction counseling. Now, I lost my brother to narcotics, and to cocaine.
Sorry.
So it's been a while, but I understand what addiction does to the families, and that's why I'm a huge proponent of addiction counseling up here. Because unless you tackle the problem, you're never going to solve the flow of narcotics coming across. It's supply and demand. It's complete.
One of the ironies, too, is and this is a complicated thing, but by making it a lot harder to cross, the cartels actually make a lot more money from human smuggling. I mean, what used to cost a lot less now costs thousands and thousands of dollars to bring people across. So, I mean, how do you change that dynamic? Because right now, it seems like the harder you squeeze, the more difficult you make it to cross, the better they do financially.
The whole system is absolutely crazy. I mean, how could you? I mean, that's why I always say we need to disrupt and dismantle these criminal organizations, hit them in a pocketbook, because that's the only thing that's going to stop them. Now, we talk about closing the southwest border to stop the flow. And it might work. I mean, think about the 1980s when Kiki Camarena, the DEA agent, was killed, and they shut the border down for a few days. The smuggling organizations all of a sudden produced 3 suspects or 4 suspects that killed him. And it's all because human trafficking, human smuggling is $1 billion a year business. That's the $5,000 a head. Coming across the border, bringing them up to the Border Patrol. But narcotics smuggling is, what, $100 billion a year? And if you shut those ports of entries down, that is shutting down not all, let's say 80% of the drugs coming into the country. So if you stop the flow coming through the border, through the ports of entry for 2 days, that's going to hit the smuggling organizations right in their pocketbook. And that's going to it's going to be I'd say the border would be closed for 2 or 3 days before there was some sort of action down in Mexico.
Jason, what do you want people to take from your book?
The book, it portrays everything I've done for the government up until 2016. So I was a Border Patrol agent, I was a Customs ICE Special Agent working narco trafficking. I worked at ICE headquarters for 6 years, and it's going to show what the border reality really is. And it's also going to touch on when I blew the whistle on the Obama administration in 2015, when they released unaccompanied alien children to criminal sponsors. And it's going to touch on, that's where the hunted factor comes in, where my own country considered me a target for, doing the right thing when I was called.
So you were a whistleblower?
Yes, I was.
Jason, thank you so much for coming in. We appreciate it.
Thanks for coming by. Congrats on the book.
Thanks.
More Rising coming up.